Hello, friends and listeners. Today's episode has one of the greatest technology investors of all time and one of my favorite people, Mike Maples Jr., on it. He's known for being the first investor in Twitter, along with investments in game-changing companies like Cruise, Lyft, Okta, Chegg, Twitch, number of them. And within Silicon Valley, he's known as one of the rare individuals that is as humble as he is bright. And I really mean that. He's just one of my favorites. He's also one of the rare Texans out here, which is obviously my favorite quality of his. Today, you're going to get to hear about everything from why he thinks about his parents so much, what's really causing the growth and inequality in the U.S., how the tech sector needs to change in a major way, and about a phrase called scissor statements that I'd never heard before, but now cannot stop thinking about. So I think you're going to enjoy this one. This is Below the Line. Mike Maples.
Hey.
Great to cheers.
Cheers.
Great to get a chance to do this with you.
Let's rock and roll.
Yeah, this is gonna be a lot of fun. When I first had the idea for the podcast, I was already really excited for when we'd get a chance to have just a long block of time talking about all kinds of things, big and small.
Yeah,
always love our conversations. We're right now we're having a little in this week's crazy drink that we're enjoying is Recess.
Peach ginger.
Peach ginger. That's right. And this is, I've had it once before, but Mike, is this your first time to have this drink? So this is, and I guess this might become a theme of the podcast of just having crazy, weird drinks each episode. This is a peach ginger CBD sparkling water drink. And it is meant to be kind of like a alcohol alternative that you drink to relax. And I think it's working.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, not too bad. So informally brought to you by Recess for this episode. So it is it's my great pleasure to get to chat with you for however long we get because, well, let's just start with a little bit of, the rap sheet. One of the best, the OGs, one of the OGs and legendary seed investor. One of the first investors in companies like Twitter, Cruise. I think you just had Okta. Was that last year? Just went public.
Year before last.
Massive, and just unicorns all over the place. Meaning, for listeners not in tech, $1 billion companies all over the place that you're investing in when it's 2 people, 3 people, an idea.
Yeah, we say too early or way too early or maybe even legally ambiguous too early.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a great. That's a great way of putting it because that is about as ambiguous. I mean, it's crazy ambiguous when you're picking these companies that early. So I really want to chat with you about that, but also I think in the same way that you're such an original thinker for being one of the first to do seed investing, especially as well as you've done it, but also original thinker on a number of different things I can't wait to touch on with you. But first question, a little bit of a softball. What are your favorite things about being a seed investor?
Well, when you get it right, you just get to see these companies just come out of nowhere and make a huge difference. And startup massive outcomes really are a rare event. And so if you get to work with one of them, you're really fortunate. There's kind of a 0.1% chance that you go the distance the way some of these have. But, we've had a chance to work with the folks at Twitter and Okta, some of the ones you mentioned, and my partner's on the board of Lyft, which has had a pretty good run. And we knew Twitch when it was Justin TV, and we knew Twitter when they couldn't decide what to call it, whether it was voicemail 2.0 or TWTTR. Lyft was Zimride. Okta was Sasher. Chegg, the textbook rental company, was it was like Craigslist for colleges, a totally different business. And so it's fun to be more of a co-conspirator than an investor, I guess. I like to get involved with these before there's a parade to jump in front of, and give these people as much unconditional love as I can early. And then it's just fun to see them do well, and to see people that you knew before they were famous on the cover of these magazines. But it's not even just about that. It's about just the way their products make a difference, and that you got to see it before the rest of the world did.
Well, it is. I want to touch on so much about the investing side of things, and it is an amazing podcast interview with you and Tim Ferris, where he just flat out, I think he titled the podcast episode "The Man Who Taught Me Everything About Investing," and I've learned so much from you as well. I want to touch on that, but before jumping into that and what you're known for, I actually wanted to ask a little bit about. I'd say you bring up one topic about as much as you bring up any company, and you talk about your parents a lot. You talk about where you grew up. We moved out here from Austin, and so we have that connection. But yeah, I would love to know a little bit, just directly about your parents, and why I love that they come up almost, I feel like, every other story when I'm with you.
Yeah, so I grew up in Oklahoma in my early years, and so all of my family had been there, and my dad was a systems engineer at IBM in the late 60s, early 70s there, and that's just kind of where our roots were. So I grew up learning how to go fishing and water skiing and rooting for the Oklahoma Sooners, and knowing who Billy Sims was, before it really made sense for a person my age to know those kinds of things.
Who's Billy Sims?
Billy Sims, the Heisman Trophy winning running back for the Oklahoma Sooners. And so, that was what life was like growing up. And even as a kid, after we moved, because my dad, being with IBM, we moved all the time. We'd go back to Oklahoma every summer and just, go to Catfish Acres to go fishing, or we would go water skiing on Lake Eufaula. It just, I still have really good memories of it. And my parents were both just super supportive people. My dad taught me so much about just how not to think about business, but how to think about life, and to understand why it's important to be honest and hardworking and stand for certain things. And my mom was just like, if I'd read a book about dinosaurs and we lived in New Jersey, she'd find out where the Museum of Natural History was and take me there to see the Tyrannosaurus Rex skeletons, and then I'd say, well, actually the bigger one is in the one in DC. She'd take me down to Washington, DC with my brother, and we'd go look at the dinosaur bones on the way to seeing Gettysburg and sitting on cannons and stuff. And so, awesome. Yeah, so my parents were both just very encouraging and supportive, and just kind of had this ethos of you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as you're willing to work for it and be honest about it.
Yeah. Is there, are there certain things that you copy directly from them with your own kids? I think you got two daughters and a son, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I hope that I did a reasonably good job. The thing that helped me, and my parents never told me this, but I came to realize it, is that, and I think I even said this on Tim's podcast one time, that when you have kids, they owe you nothing. They didn't decide to have you. You chose to have them. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of this trap that parents get into of wanting to have gratitude from their kids. And if that happens, great. But expecting it from them is a form of manipulation. And so, I think that that's the wrong reasons for thinking about what parenting is all about. And so I always thought that was really important, is that they owe you nothing. And that if you put that burden in the relationship, you'll not be the best parent that you could be.
Yeah. Do any of those things carry over to investing? conscious or subconscious?
A little bit. It would sound paternalistic to suggest that a startup's like your kid, because it's so much not like that. In many ways, when you're an investor, you're way more along for the ride than anything else. But, I like to say probably for the most part that if your kids end up not so great, you probably don't deserve as much of the blame as you might give yourself. And if they turn out great, you probably don't deserve as much of the credit either. And startups are a little bit that way. When they work, you probably shouldn't pat yourself on the back too much. And when they don't work, you probably shouldn't be blamed as the VC either.
That's interesting. Yeah, it is certainly, the dynamics are wildly different. I think from the outside looking in, you can feel like the investor and entrepreneur. It is familial. Oh, and it is familial in terms of congenial, but you can feel like maybe there is a paternalistic or maternalistic aspect. But yeah, it is as much of a paternal and maternal aspect as I don't know, adopting an 18-year-old. There's so much of just the startup you can't control, and you are along for the ride. But within parenting, I feel like when I think about my parents and how supportive they were as well, and I was thinking about this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that it's the concept of inheriting potentially, and I don't, it's not a fully formed thought, but we inherit the virtues or the vices of our parents, and we're all filled with both, but we inherit both of them, and you look at an individual in 2019, and they really are it's multiple generations of support, or multiple generations of potentially maybe the person is completely self-made, but in a lot of ways, a lot of great people look at their parents and commend their parents for everything that they did for them. And I feel like there's got to be something transgenerational around that support, where it's never someone just individually accomplishing anything. It's always not just the team, the startup, but maybe it started decisions 10 years before they were born.
And I guess the other thing I look at with parenting is a lot of people misunderstand. So some parents, they have a lot and they give their kids a lot. But when I think my parents didn't get financially successful till later in life. I was already halfway through college. But what my parents really gave me was a way of thinking about stuff. And so, for example, my parents used to tell me, you have what you have. There's going to be some people who have more than you in life and some people who have less than you in life. And they're going to have more than you and less than you in lots of different ways. So, if you wanted to, you could go look at Billy Sims and say, he runs faster than you. Give me your legs, Billy Sims. Yeah. But, that's just not a very productive way to look at the world. And so one of the things I got from them was this idea that every day is a gift, and that just having the gift of being alive is a privilege. And the question is just, what do you want to do with your time? And how do you want to make the most of your time? And there will always be people who got a head start vis-a-vis you, and there'll be people that you got a head start compared to. But don't fall into the trap of this learned helplessness of saying, oh, the world isn't fair, woe is me, because the fact that you get to live at all is just such a great gift. And you don't even know how much time you're going to have. And so a lot of people I know seem to be doing great, and they don't get as much time as people who don't seem to be doing as well. And so it's just every day is a gift. Make the most of it that you can, and sort of honor the gift in what you do with it each day at a time.
Yeah. Well, what are some life moments that come to mind where you had that fork in the road, where it could have been early in your development, it could have been learned helplessness, or it could have been, okay, I don't have the legs of so-and-so, but here's something else that I do have, or that I can foster. Yeah.
Or it's funny. One of my earliest childhood memories, I was in this fishing contest. It was this under 16 fishing contest, and I was 5 years old. So I was the youngest you could be. And I went out there, and, I just barely even hold a fishing pole. And I'm out there with my dad, and he says, there's going to be all these people, and they're going to be running around the ponds in the lake. And I think we'd be better off if we thought about the type of spot that we want to be at and just stay there the whole time. Mm-hmm. And you may not win. Somebody may beat you. They may get luckier than you, but I think your best chance at winning is let's pick our spot and let's talk about what a good spot would be. Do we want a spot that is under the sun or that it's shade, or do we want a spot that's deep or shallow, and how would we know?
And you're 5 years old.
I'm like 5 years old, and he's asking me these questions and reason and being patient, right? While we try to reason through it. So we finally pick a spot and we just sit there. And sure enough, everybody's running around all over the place, especially the older kids. And lo and behold, I end up catching this carp, and I still have the trophy. In fact, it's a good thing I do, because most time when I tell people this story, they don't believe it. They think it's got to be some made up Pollyanna story. Yeah. But I caught this fish, and it was, I probably remember it as being bigger than it was, but it was big enough to win. And so I have this green trophy that says, Mike Maples Jr. carp catch. I think it was 1973, maybe 1972. And, it's such a good lesson about life, is just the value of focusing, but also being confident in your decision when you put the work into making the decision. And so it was one of those good early life experiences where you sort of got rewarded for doing it the right way.
That's that is a great story. Actually, it brings to mind a question that I want to ask you, which is 3 stories in your life that helped shape who you are. That sounds like a perfect first one. But on that note, it's my background before tech was in development economics and the nonprofit realm. And one of the things that I saw there that I see in tech pretty often, I see in startups pretty often, that totally maps to, just picking a spot and just going hard at that one spot instead of looking at all of the potential things that places that you could be fishing and trying to fish them all. You're almost 3 spots in, you're already thinking about the next spot before your line has hit the water in that 3rd spot. Before you've even, it's like, as you're chewing, you're thinking about the next bite, and no one can enjoy a meal that way. And it's in the development realm or in the nonprofit realm, there's so many people that would join the organization that I worked with and want to just go in 10 different directions all at once. Mm-hmm. And it's, in startups, you hear the lessons about focus so much that you still obviously have that human tendency you see of going in too many directions. But from the nonprofit realm, one of the things that I always like starkly contrast startups versus the nonprofit realm is, in the nonprofit realm, it felt like 10 different battles all at the same time. Let's do them all. And what was weirdly perverse about it was, the more of a problem that you can create, or the more problems that you can elucidate, then actually you the more money you can get to come in the door, because you've made the problem seem even bigger. And it's this strange thing that's almost like programmatized. Your lesson, that is a great lesson to learn at 5 years old.
Yeah, and you even think about helping folks get ahead who are behind in this world. You'd almost be better off picking one person that you could have a real impact on. And so, like I like to say, if you would like to see more of something in this world, whether it's minorities getting ahead, or whether people living in tough parts of town being exposed to a better life, or gender diversity, whatever it is, name your thing that you wish you'd see more of, the best way to have an impact on it for real, I find, is almost always to do less but better. And the temptation is too often we want to talk in the abstract and be inside of our heads and do things at scale. Yeah, I remember when there were the fires in Napa, my wife Julie, while everybody was sending likes and tweets to Napa from Silicon Valley, she sets up a depot in our garage, and it's like stuff's coming in and out, and we're routing it to the shelters and stuff. And there's that's not super scalable, but sometimes it works better to just get real and to get focused and to do less but better. Find that one thing or that one person. It's Naval Ravikant who's a close friend of yours.
I've heard him say before, he just doesn't believe in macro solutions. That it's like, when you think there's a solution for 300 million people and you're going to design it from the top down, it's just, he just, and I don't know his age now, but he just said, I think he phrased it as like a few years ago, I just stopped believing in this idea of macro solutions, that there are micro solutions and we should all be in search of micro solutions.
Yeah. It's sort of like, think big, act small, and increment your way there. And sort of, that's almost always the better way to get there.
Right. I've actually been fishing a handful of times in Oklahoma, and frog hunting. My grandfather.
It's not hard to find lakes in Oklahoma. No, that's for sure.
It is not. Yeah. That we would go fishing with our grandfather who lived in Tulsa and Tulsa, Haskell, and Muskogee.
Okay.
It's different parts of life. So on that question of three stories, that'd be a great first one that helped shaped who you are. What would two other stories be that have helped?
Yeah, that's probably a good jumping off point. And then I guess another one would be more about my mom. So my mom is really good at art.
Listeners, see, you're getting it here. Yeah. You're seeing proof of the pudding that Mike thinks so much about his parents. It is so refreshing and awesome to hear someone talk about their family so much.
Yeah, so my mom is really good at art and painting and ink drawing and just illustration in general. And I picked up some of that skill when I was really young, but in particular, I really got interested in lettering. So at first I looked at these Japanese characters, and I asked her for one of those brushes that those artisans would use to paint these Japanese kanji characters. And she said, I think maybe you could be good at calligraphy. And she knew of this guy named Ken Brown, who was at the time one of the world's most famous calligraphers. And, if you go into Michael's store even today, I think they sell the Elegant Writer pens that sponsored by Ken Brown. And she introduced me to him, she and my Aunt Ann, and I went and visited with him. And he gave me a kit, and I started writing him letters. And next thing I know, he was publishing these letters. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try to turn this into a business. So my first ever job, we had a finished attic at the house, and I set up a calligraphy workshop. And whenever my mom would go into town, I'd follow her with my samples, and I would go to the fanciest restaurants in town or the jewelry stores or anything that sold high margin products and show my samples and say, hey, I can hand letter these for you for your store, and it'll give you an extra, give you that extra zip factor. And so that was a way better way to make money than weeding the flower beds in the sixth grade. So, but she always, whenever I got interested in something, whether it was dinosaur bones or whatever it was, she always wanted to make sure that my introduction to that topic was world class, that it was, that she would do everything that she could to encourage it. And, you realize more in hindsight what she was doing that you did at the time.
What was she doing?
Oh, she was just trying to get me to anything I was interested in for its own sake. She wanted me to follow the thread of it, but she never pressured me. She never said, hey, why don't you do more calligraphy, or why don't you write a book on calligraphy, or any of that stuff. It was always just, it was, if I was interested in something, she would double down until I got tired of it.
Yeah, that is awesome. Out of curiosity, what are some of the other things that through your life up until this point are just kind of these side project hobbies or things that you loved dabbling in? You got dinosaurs, you got calligraphy.
Yeah, unfortunately too many. So I really like photography a lot. So I've gotten into cameras and manual focus lenses, and then now the software's so good that you can bring it in to Photoshop and do a lot of really interesting stuff. And then the really unfortunate one is cinematography. So when Leica discontinued the R camera, I went onto eBay and bought all these Leica R primes and found these guys who could convert it into cinema glass. And so I have incredibly cinematic images of my puppy Stella rolling around in the backyard with super shallow depth of field and colored like Fuji film stock.
When was this?
I started really getting interested in it about 2012, and when the digital cinema cameras started to get close to good enough, when the Canon 5D Mark II came out, it became clear that there was going to be a breakthrough in terms of the images that you could get even as an amateur.
Interesting. Yeah. It's sounds like you've always been a pretty visual person.
And I'd say that making movies is about the biggest challenge, because you've got to not only have the skills of photography, but just the filtering of the light that comes in. You have to be more exact. You have to master manual focus. You have to master lighting, and you have to master sound. And once you get it into your editing system, you got to get it all synchronized and figure out how to edit it. And if you want to have graphics or anything overlaid or CGI of any kind, you got to figure out how to use different rendering packages and different compositing packages, all this stuff. And so you've got to know how to do about 20 things really well if you're going to make movies completely on your own.
Yeah. When you were young, did you entertain the idea of becoming a movie maker?
A little bit, but not too much. I was more into being an architect, and then computers happened, and that's where I went. I mean, it was obvious to me when the personal computers started to happen. It was completely obvious to me that that's what I'd be doing. But it wasn't at all about the money. At the time, PCs, nobody thought that was going to be a big deal. It was more like a hobby.
What was the time? What year are we talking?
Junior high. Right. And so by junior high, it was pretty obvious to me that I was going to do something with computers and software.
So you're junior high, so around 1930. No. Tell me what.
I used to be the young guy.
No, you are the young guy. You are the young guy. I'm just ribbing you. So is this about late 90s?
Probably early 80s. I was in junior high, and the Apple II was already out, and the IBM PC came out. And because my dad was at IBM, we got one of the early ones. And that's when it really started to become a major thing for me.
Yeah. And what was the hook of seeing that becoming potentially a game changer? What about it?
Well, and literally just speaking of game changing, you may get a kick out of this. So the other day, my younger brother, Benton, found this thing online so we wrote a game when I was a freshman in high school called PC Fun. And it had 3 games. It had a game called Killer Bees, where you're shooting killer bees out in outer space. And it had Cosmic Crisis, where it's kind of like Defender, but not really. And then another one that was like, what do they call it? Something about these balls falling from outer space, and you catch them in your yard in a bucket. And we ended up winning the Connecticut PC User Group Disc of the Month Award.
Oh, no way.
And I hadn't thought about this since I applied. Probably the last time I thought about it was when applying to college, right? You say, hey, I won the Disc of the Month Award or whatever. And somehow somebody had uploaded these games. I don't even know how they could possibly work, because these games are probably written in 1982. But they have all the screenshots. And so I don't know if you have podcast notes, but I got all the screenshots from these games. And my brother's like, can you believe we found this? And
really?
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Tweet it out and I'll retweet.
So it's pretty funny. And then, so that was, so speaking of game changers, right, as you said earlier. So I got interested in it, writing video games. And then, all through college, I'd be selling them from time to time, and I'd just be copying floppies in my spare time and shipping them off to people.
I love how seems to be a common thread of seeing something and then commercializing it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Calligraphy or video games.
Yeah,
or computer games. That's and so from where were you in high school? In Connecticut?
Yeah, New Canaan High School. Yeah.
And then where'd you go to school, and what did you think you were going to study in school? And it sounds like technology was a big part of.
Yeah. So I went to Stanford undergrad, and it was the place I wanted to go. It was in Silicon Valley, and the weather was really nice, and that's really what I wanted to do. And so I was lucky enough to get in there, and then just had a great time. And I didn't anticipate all the things I'd learned there. but it was a great time to be there. It was a great place to be. Yeah, no regrets.
Yeah. And then between Stanford and Floodgate, becoming an investor, what was the path?
Yes, I worked at Silicon Graphics for a couple of years, and one of my jobs was a product manager of digital media. And so we needed to, at the time, Silicon Graphics sold to like military and aerospace, and we were trying to convince the special effects houses to use us for computer graphics. So Terminator 2, the Liquid Man, the Abyss, and then eventually the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And so every time they would do one of those movies, Industrial Light and Magic would buy about $10 to $15 million worth of SGI gear, because at that time it was improving incredibly rapidly, not just the processing, but the graphics and the networking. And so, that was a really fun job because we got to work with software vendors and work with people cobbling things together to make these special effects. And every Silicon Graphics was across the road from this cinema complex in Mountain View. And so every time one of these movies would come out, all of us on the digital media team would go across the street and watch these movies and just be in awe of what they could do with our computers. And at the time, nobody's computers were being used other than ours to make these effects. So it was pretty cool. That was a fun job.
So you did get into movie making in some way.
So that was a fun job. And, you got to see the very beginnings of it all. This is when Avid was a new company that did the Media Composer and helped do the film editing. And it was just a great time to see it all. And then after that, I went to Harvard Business School for a couple years. And then when I graduated, that's when I moved down to Austin and was involved with 2 startups that ended up working out. One was called Tivoli Systems, which went public and was acquired by IBM. And then Motive, which I started with 4 other buddies, and we went public in 2004.
In kind of the adage of looking back and connecting dots, what are some of the dots or some of the moments you look back on your career that you might not have appreciated a whole lot at the time, but you look back and you're like, whoa, that was a major moment, if any come to mind?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, I suppose. The main thing, I guess, that helped me in those situations they were all really uncertain situations. And there was one piece of advice that I got from my dad when I was young about decision making that I wish more people knew. So he used to tell me that most decisions are one of 2 types. It's 70-30 or 51-49. And if it's 70-30, now let's assume you've done the work to find facts to figure out what type it is. If it's 70-30, you know what you need to do. You're just, for whatever reason, not courageous enough to just declare it for what it is and follow through on it. But the other thing that's kind of insightful is if it's 51-49, it almost doesn't matter which one you pick. So the closer the options are, the less it matters which one you pick.
Yeah.
And the farther apart the options are, just pick one because you know the answer already.
Right.
And so what I learned from him was that decisions actually are more like a product. A product should have a ship date and a quality level, but there is a time value of decisions. And that what happens with a lot of people is they don't make the wrong decision because they don't have the facts or they don't have a framework to decide. It's because they let their emotions get attached to the decision in a way that interfere with their judgment or their timing of the decision. And so if you think about decisions as a product with a time value, I've always found it to be useful. And not all decisions are that simple. Not all are yes, no, up, down, right, or left. But quite often they're more simple than you realize. And it's like, it's the framing of the decision and the willingness to follow through that really matter more than anything else.
Yeah. So there's a Marine Corps quote. I believe it's a Marine Corps quote. That's the only wrong decision is no decision.
Right.
You could sit there trying to gather information all day long. You could literally if you're walking across a field, you could sit there gathering information literally, infinitely. You could just sit there but the person that's going to get to the other side fastest is the one who says, all right, this is the path.
Yeah. And life is kind of more like a dance than it is a riddle, right? And so people tend to look at a decision as there's an absolute right answer and I need to divine what that right answer is. But the fact of the matter is it's more like a dance in that sometimes you can lead the dance. And so life is really more of a combination of asserting and listening and, emergent strategy and deliberate strategy. And you can't, the emergent answer won't reveal itself if you wait too long. You have to be engaged with the topic or engaged with the decision. And so, this idea that there should be a deadline to decisions and it should be about gathering the facts before that deadline, but then commit yourself to decide unless there's a strong reason not to. Right. Is kind of I've always found to be really helpful.
That's super helpful. I remember someone really smart told me one time something similar of and I like your framework of basically two types of decisions. And yes, there are exceptions to everything, but I think I like your breakdown of basically 70-30 to where you know the right decision already.
Yeah.
So you don't need more time to deliberate.
Nope.
And it's even in those courageous moments, like whether it's skydiving or whether it's a really hard decision in your career or life, just make the decision and actually more time. Courage doesn't grow in time. Yep. And the other thing that sounds really fascinating is the 51-49, where you can't tell if it's not 70-30, you don't know the right decision. Counterintuitively, maybe it doesn't matter. And because it doesn't matter.
And the closer it is to 51-49, the more often my heuristic is to flip a coin. And if it comes up heads and I'm like, I knew it would be heads. I knew that was right. Then I go with heads or whatever it comes up. But if I say, maybe I should do 2 out of 3, I do the opposite. Yeah. And so but kind of this idea that usually you kind of know what the answer ought to be if you've done the work up front. Yeah. And that it's not knowing the right answer isn't really the issue. It's the will to decide rather than the skill to know the right answer.
Right. Yeah. That's and the timing of just making the decision, because the only wrong, the one isn't right in every one of these scenarios is to not make a decision, and yet you can find yourself just waffling. Right. Yeah. Right. That's a great decision making framework. That is, and it's amazing. Your dad gave that to you. I learned that an investor out here told me one time that if you're deliberating constantly on a really hard decision, it's actually probably because it doesn't matter what you choose, rather than it matters so much that you have to your right, you have to divine the right answer, and there's only one right answer. It's just either 70-30 and the right one, make the call, or 51-49.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. The other thing I learned throughout my career was I think that you want to have a mix of deliberate and emergent strategies. And I observed this watching Al Gore. And so, first of all, I have nothing against Al Gore, but you realize that his goal in life was to be president of the United States, and not being president of the United States was going to be a disappointment to him if it didn't happen. And whereas you look at George W. Bush, and he kind of bops around, and next thing you know, he's managing the Texas Rangers, and then he runs for governor. He beats Ann Richards. And how did that happen? Next thing you know, he's running for president, and he wins this thing. And what I sort of learned from that is that life, it's good to have a plan, but life has a way of not conforming to your master plan. And you want to have a strategy, and you want to have sort of an agenda that you're pursuing, but secrets kind of emerge and bubble up all around you that you don't expect. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the secret that emerges is better than the secret you were pursuing. Mm-hmm. And you got to have the presence of mind to know that life just gave you the gift of a bigger secret. And you got to be willing to say, hey, this thing I was pursuing, maybe not as big or as much of an opportunity as this other thing I could go after. Right. Because if I hadn't have thought that way, there's no way Floodgate ever would have happened. I would have just kept looking for a job at big VC firms, and I would have never seen that 500,000 is the new 5 million. And hey, wait a second, maybe that's the real opportunity, is go start a new type of fund that does that. Right.
Well, and before we touch on that, we'd love to hear that third story that shaped who you are.
Yeah, I guess, okay, I'll try this one on for size. So when I was in first grade, I asked my parents for an HP pocket calculator. And, in present day terms, an HP pocket calculator probably costs about as much as a Mac Pro would, not the MacBook Pro, but like the big one, the expensive one. And so my parents were really early in their career. They couldn't afford it. And so they said, well, we can get you a calculator someday, but you're not really old enough for a calculator yet. You need to know how to do all your times tables at least. So taught myself times tables and came back and said, okay, I'm ready for a calculator. They said, well, now you need to do division. I taught myself division and came back. Okay, I want my calculator. Then they said, no, long division. And then I taught myself long division. And they said, no, not with remainders, with decimals. And it kept going.
Moving the goalpost on you.
Yeah. And so eventually I got a calculator. Well, we got two, so they were cheap by the time I was in the third grade. And so we went to Radio Shack and bought two, and we took one of them apart. So I spent time with my dad learning how it worked. But it's funny, way later in life, when I was at Stanford, I ran into David Packard in Tresidder Union, and I was nervous about approaching him because I thought, well, what if he's curmudgeonly or doesn't want any company? So I just walked up and said, hi, Mr. Packard, and I really admire what you've done with HP, and just wanted to say hi. And he's like, well, what's your name and what year are you at Stanford, and tell me more and stuff like that. Would you like to have lunch? And so I was having lunch with him, and I think it really made him happy that some first grader who at the time lived in Princeton, New Jersey, was inspired by that product. It was designed. It was really Bill Hewlett's pet project, but the idea was that calculators used to take a desktop, and what he wanted was one that would fit in a shirt pocket. And so, and it's funny because after that experience, a few years later, a new site called eBay came out, and finally I was able to get an HP calculator. So I have the HP calculator I wanted in first grade in perfect new condition that I bought on eBay as soon as I could get one.
It's one of the great things. And for listeners, would you describe yourself as an introvert or extrovert?
I'd say that I'm more of an introvert, actually. Right. But I like people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's I've heard you describe yourself as an introvert, and I've seen it's not this. In fact, we were just at an event. You were ready to bolt.
Oh, yeah. So I'm like, there's way too many people here. I can't hear myself think.
But it takes a lot of courage to go up and just say, maybe not even know what you're going to say, but I think a great thing you can always lean back on is telling someone that you admire something that they poured themselves into. Is always well received. But it's also a testament to the Bay Area. You can run into people like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Like when I was a junior, I'd heard really good things about Bill Campbell, and this was when he was running Claris. And so I'm like, I'm going to meet Bill Campbell. So
do you mind telling the listeners a little bit about who Bill Campbell is?
So Bill Campbell, there's a book that's recently come out about him called $1 Trillion Coach. And so he was simultaneously on the boards of Apple and Google, but he was once the CEO of Intuit, and before that, a failed company, but that spawned a bunch of really interesting people and companies called Go, a handwriting tablet company. And then before that, he was at a company called Claris, which made software for the Mac. And before that, he was actually at Apple as a VP working under John Sculley at the time. And so I was a junior in college, and I wanted to get to know this guy because he was in John Sculley's book Odyssey, and everybody said all these amazing things about him. And so one day I just reach out, I call up, and I get his administrator, and I say, hey, I'm a Stanford student, and I'm putting together a field study, and I would like to do a field study on Claris's objectives and whether Claris is meeting its objectives. And she says, okay, let me see if I can put you through to him.
Free consulting. Yeah.
And she puts me through to him. And so next thing I know, I'm talking to Bill Campbell. And so he invites me to do this field study. Well, at the time, his e-staff had Yogan Dalal, who ended up being the managing partner at Mayfield, Donna Dubinsky, who was at Palm, CEO Palm, Jaleh Bishrat, who ended up being one of the great marketing folks in the Valley. And, he introduced me to all of them and had me interview them, and I wrote a paper. I went back to one of my professors and said, "Hey, Claris wants to do a field study. Can I get some course credit for this?" So I did. And then I wrote this report, and then he invited me to a beer bust, but I couldn't go until until I turned 21. So my birthday was March 15th. And this field study was going on in the spring quarter, winter quarter, Stanford terms. So it wasn't really until the last 2 weeks of winter quarter that I could go to one of their beer busts on Friday. Oh, so it's pretty fun.
He's a legend.
Yeah.
Anyone that in his name recognition does not, especially outside the Valley, does not is not indicative of how influential he was. And yeah, anyone that's out there, feel free to Google Bill Campbell and you'll see how big of a deal.
And I don't know how many of your listeners are in college or grad school or whatever, but one thing I learned when I was in school was that you have a bunch of free moves, I called them. And so, if you want to meet, say at the time, the person I really wanted to meet in venture capital was John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins. And you realize that it's easier to meet John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins when you're a student than when you're just another guy in Silicon Valley, product manager, or whoever. And so when I was in business school, I just made a list of all the people I wanted to meet. And I learned that as an extension of my undergrad at Stanford. And so free moves are perishable. And so, if those 2 years pass you by and you don't make your free moves, you don't get them back. And I think that that's another thing that I've learned through time, is that there are just certain windows of opportunity where you have free moves. Mm-hmm. And if you don't take them, they pass you by and you don't ever get another one.
Right.
Or at least not of that type.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well on courage, being in a place like the Bay Area. But I look back at when I was a CEO and building one of my first companies, just the fundraising. I loved fundraising because I got to it wasn't about whether the person on the other side of the table investor or not. I just got to meet these amazingly smart people for free for an hour and get to maybe build a relationship with them or just get a piece of free advice from these brilliant people that it was like, okay, I'm getting to go to a dinner with Mark Andreessen. It's house money. I'm just glad that I get to go.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I had that, and I think that graciousness, also you're an extremely gracious person. I think it comes across not only just telling, someone that you admire what they poured themselves into, but also meaning it, as well as just really feeling that gratitude for the chance to meet with these people. It comes across so genuinely, and it's not, you're not meeting them for this other thing that you're working on.
Oh yeah. It's funny you say that. I never thought of it as, oh wow, Bill Campbell would be a valuable person for me to know. Mm-hmm. It was more like, okay, if he's nice enough to take time with me, I'm going to be really careful to consider what questions I'm going to ask him, because if you could learn any secret from Bill Campbell, what would it be? And so I never really, and I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is they think, oh, this person has connections or whatever. And it's not the connections that I find to be as important as the frameworks that they use to look at the world, and the way that they problem solve and help lead other people or get consensus around what they're doing. Those are the types of things that are valuable secrets that not everybody has. Mm-hmm.
And we've become friends, and you're a mentor and advisor for me. But one thing I tell younger folks and peers, friends that even one of my older brothers that is asked about how to find mentors. It's not, it needs to be a two-way street. And to be honest, you have to bring the majority of the value in the first few meetings, because the people that you actually want mentorship from they're not giving away free internships for people that are 10 years younger, just for their health.
Yeah.
And it's you with Claris and Bill Campbell saying, okay, I'll basically give you free consulting. I'll tell you what you're working on.
And also, you take two people and you put them in front of the same mentor type of person. One person will get something valuable out of that. And the other person, just because they approach it with the wrong questions, the wrong mindset, won't get something valuable out of that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wish more people understood. It's like, if you have a chance to talk to somebody like Bill Campbell, or when I was lucky enough when I was young to have a chance to talk to John Doerr, you don't just go up there and say, hey, what's up? What's it like to be at Kleiner Perkins? What's it like to be CEO of Claris? Tell me what your job is like every day, right? You don't have many chances to be in front of that person and get the most out of that opportunity to learn something. And so what you ask in a situation like that is, it's almost more important than what the insight they have to offer you, because there are just certain questions that you could ask that'll tease out way more insight than just standard run of the mill stuff that they hear everybody ask them.
Right. Who do you learn from now? Who are some of the people that are those people for you now that you can't wait to get a lunch with for the insight or drinks with?
Yeah, the people I really like spending time with now are the people that I call the seers. And so a lot of the great investments that I've made, it really wasn't that I saw the company for what it was in some market map. It was more that there was somebody brilliant, usually very technical, who I trusted their judgment. And they just said, hey, Mike, you should look at this. I think that this is going to mean something. And so, and a good example, and this was really, Ann ended up leading the investment, but Leah introduced both of us. So Leah Buskey from TaskRabbit introduced us to Logan and John at what became Lyft. And Leah was likely to have good taste in sharing economy kind of deals, because she was like one of the early sharing economy gurus. And so I really enjoy trying to find the set of people out there in Silicon Valley who have it's almost like Jedi skills of knowing what's going to happen and what's interesting. Very often they're able to reduce a complex idea in first principles the way a physicist like Feynman would. And when you have an opportunity to meet with one of those people, you should be asking a set of questions that tease out secrets, rather than just, hey, how's it going? What startups do you like? That kind of stuff. And so you're trying to come up with questions that will lead you to, I say, lead you down some roads to get hit by the lucky truck. And so you're trying to create strategic luck. And so I really like those conversations. I really enjoy that.
Who are some of those I gotta ask, who are some of those people? Leah back in the day, Jeff Huber at the time was at Google in the early days when I got here. Ariel Poehler helped me understand a lot of things. Who else? Michael Seibel has, I don't know if I think of him as much of a visionary as some of them, but he really has a good understanding of which founders have the stuff and which ones don't. So he introduced me to Brian Chesky at Airbnb and at the time Airbed and Breakfast. If I look back on the intros he's made, they've been consistently very high quality. And so, yeah, it's funny. Like I've learned in my business, it's less important to be the best expert, and it's more important to know the best expert and to have good taste in who that is, who's for real and who's a pretender. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's if your eyes are open and there's insight all around, and it's not a stage of their career, and it's not it's usually people that are undervalued. And most people are missing
very often. And then that's the other thing I've learned, is that you have to be continuously updating your idea of who the seers are, because some of the people who were seers once, well, now they've gotten rich, or they have a different job, or they're not founders, or they're for whatever reason they're not super close to the front lines of the next new thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. And so you're always looking for people who are there and who just have some type of an unconventional insight by virtue of their domain knowledge and just their focus and just what they're working on at the time.
Yeah. Is you actually once told me, and I think if I'm remembering the wording you chose, but so in investing, there's a term deal flow, where it's just the flow, like a river flow of deals coming across your desk or coming across you as an investor. And he said and I said, what can hurt your deal flow over time? Let's say you're in the right place at the right time and you have great deal flow and you're seeing great companies. What can hurt that over time, or what can you inadvertently do that causes it to potentially wane? And I think it might have been building on some of these things that you're talking about. If maybe you were a seer once, but certain things, you're blinded by too much stuff coming your way, or you lose out on that network that seer was connected to. And I think you said the enemy of good deal flow is good deal flow.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to say that ultimately deal flow becomes your enemy, because so you use the metaphor of a river here. It's like, let's say you're in the Amazon and this river's flowing, it's super fast. The metaphor I like for spotting good startup, Mike Moritz from Sequoia Capital expressed this to me back in 2004 when I first met him. It's more like bird spotting. And so you've got this river of flow coming in at you, but what you really should be doing is not looking so much at the river and reacting to its currents, but you should be looking up in the trees to try to spot that bird that nobody's ever seen before. And so, it's more like, it's like spotting a peculiar finch in the Galapagos Islands. That you're trying to find these capitalist mutations, and accepting the inbound flow for what it is usually is not the path to that. Usually it comes down to, I find, talking to the seers and having an idea of what you were trying to look for before it came in to pitch you.
Do you feel like the bet and you're perennially listed as one of the best investors in the world, as you've advanced in your career and have just been known as this great investor? Do you feel effects of that negatively hurting your ability to see through, or it just becomes harder and harder to find those rare birds? Yeah,
well, I worry all the time that the odds are now against me. And so I think that once you turn 50, the odds are against you. And the reason is that your peer group is no longer at the edge. And so, and some people may interpret this as age discrimination. I'm talking about myself here, right? So, but I believe that when you're an investor, you have to always be talking to the people who are closest to the new things happening. And what can happen if you're not careful is you say stuff like, well, these millennials, they don't get it. Or, these young people, they get coddled too much, when they start companies, or, there's no governance on boards anymore. What's up with that? Or all these false unicorns, you get into this get off my lawn sort of old guy thinking. And I've kind of decided as soon as I start to think that way, I need to hang it up. And so, because I like millennials, and I like it when founders have a lot of power. And so, when I see the changes, I enjoy them and think, hey, let's have more of it. And so, I figure as long as a sort of young at heart and have a youthful kid energy, I could still do this business. But I also feel the need to just overreact to not assuming that my filter's good anymore.
Well, you got that in spades, the amazing energy in spades. And I remember you were an investor and a competitor of ours, and so I couldn't reach out to you, which really bummed me out, because I knew you from just, there are very few Texans out here, very few Texas VCs. Actually, John Doerr is maybe one of them.
That's right. Yeah.
But very few. And but I always wanted to work with you, and just didn't. It didn't line up because because you're an investor in another company, but I've always loved our conversations, and it's always, I think one of the things that it's not just youthful energy, but it's this energetic curiosity to hear from, to ask me questions. And it just always, and I've told you this before, it just blows me away that you come to a meeting and you want to ask me questions, and you have this energetic curiosity to ask me questions. And it's, and there are many people at your stage of the career that's just, it's so easy for you to think you have the answers.
Yeah.
And therefore you're the person at the coffee with the answers. Not only is that, it's like a doom loop, because then not that many people want to get coffee with the person that has all the answers, but two, it is such a dangerous, I mean, the world is completely different every 5 years. So thinking you have the answers is, and blocking off.
Yeah. And it's, it's like Gates says that, success, the poison of success is when you get the idea that you can't lose, that the success is because of how good you are, and you this mindset that you can't lose, and that's when you lose the biggest. When you have the most confidence in things that that just aren't so, and so you get all kinds of inputs. You get the inputs you get are different, because if you say, hey, I think maybe X is true, people are like, oh yeah, sure, of course that X is true. And so when a couple things go your way early, people give you more credit for being smart than you deserve.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that keep you humble? What are some of those inputs?
I keep losing money on more than my share of deals. So yeah, that keeps you humble.
It is, I want to ask about getting into Floodgate. So what was and then a lot of questions about the investing side of things. What was going from building 2 companies in Austin and doing well on the operating side to switching over to investing? You told me one time that you basically approached a VC in Austin Ventures, and almost created your own deal. Like it wasn't like, hey, I want to come work with you. It was like, hey, here's something.
Well, yeah. So it was a lot of it, John Thornton. So, I'd thought about venture, but then I realized if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it in California. And then I was out here in the Bay Area, and I started seeing all these companies that.
And what year was this?
This would have been 2005. And so I started seeing companies that wanted to raise only $250,000. And when I'd been a founder, you just couldn't even start with less than $5 million, because you had to buy Solaris servers and Oracle databases and host them at Exodus data centers, and you had these waterfall development schedules that would take a year, release, death march kind of stuff. And so I kept seeing these companies that didn't need very much money. And so then I got interested in this idea of creating what I called at the time a VC microfund. And I don't think it would have, had I not been inside of some VC firms. I spent some time at Foundation Capital and August Capital. I wouldn't have known, I wouldn't have seen enough to know that was an opportunity. And when I described it to John Thornton at Austin Ventures, he said, well, why don't we put you in business with $15 million and see what you do? And, I just had a pretty good run of beginner's luck, and off we went.
What created that beginner's luck? And I know that you and I have chatted about it. Luck is certainly a factor.
Yeah, sure.
What were some of the things that created the beginner's luck? And
lack of competition.
Yeah.
Back then, if there was something interesting, well, there was me and there was Josh Koppelman and Steve Anderson, and there wasn't many other people. Yeah. And so I doubt there was $50 million of organized capital in the world to chase these things. Mm-hmm. And so, now billions get raised a year in seed funding.
Right.
I think last time I checked, there's like 850 seed funds. And so, in fact, probably by the time this podcast's over, there'll be another 5.
And what are some of the hidden opportunities, or beneath the kind of the obvious layers that exist now that are non-obvious to most, but that you're intrigued by? If you were to start from scratch today, go in any direction, what are some of the intriguing directions?
If I could start from scratch, the problem I think would be fun to chase would be how do you fund an entrepreneur like Elon Musk to go from 0 to 1? So you think about Tesla, the amount of time that Elon has had to spend funding this thing on top of everything else he's had to do just blows my mind. And, he made hundreds of millions of dollars from PayPal and basically had to bet 100% of it to keep Tesla alive. And, it's just absurd that Tesla's still alive. I mean, just what it takes to build a car company, the complexity of it, just the sheer impossibility of it to begin with, it just blows my mind. And so I would love to find a way to fund 0 to 1 projects where it seems impossible, but if you pull it off, it has just this transformative effect on the world. The Teslas, the SpaceXs of the world. And it's, in a world where we have artificially low interest rates, we don't have a lack of capital. And so ironically, we're using capital, $800 billion was used last year by the Fortune 500 to buy back its own stock. I'd much rather see that type of money be invested in big ideas that are still in the pre-scale phase, but if they work, they would have a massive impact on humanity. Building a new city, those kinds of things that seem just like an impossible dream, but that if you had the right money and the right funding mechanism, maybe you could do it.
Yeah,
that's probably what I'd work on.
It feels like there's a chance we're inching towards that, and same kind of logic of one guy runs a 4-minute mile and then there's 50 people the next year.
Yeah.
As you see someone like Elon Musk go from software and building that in a way that doesn't necessarily, I don't think people realize the scale of a company when it's software driven. Yeah. But from PayPal or companies like Facebook that unlocked, I know for me, this ability of, I can be 20 something years old and go change the world, to Elon Musk and Tesla saying, okay, we're going to push the world forward in a very different way than most. We don't know if we're going to succeed, but we're going to push the world forward by getting everyone to begin producing electric cars. It's almost guaranteed they've succeeded in that.
Yeah. And and the thing that I'd like to see us do more things like that, because we used to decide we were going to build a transcontinental railroad, or we decided we were going to land on the moon. And those types of things bring people together throughout humanity. And that tends to bring together people more than Fortune 500 companies borrowing money to buy back their own stock at lower than market interest rates. And so I think we need more projects like that, so that we can show ourselves what we're capable of.
Right. Well, and I think that this is the meat of this podcast. I'm really excited about some of the things we're about to touch on.
Oh boy.
And I think that there's so much great content that people can find of you on investing, how to invest, but kind of the whole point of Below the Line is, that stuff is certainly things that you think a lot about, but what else is going on? Like, what created Mike Maples Jr., the one of the OG seed investors? Was this original thinking? I'd love to go over some of these things that you think a lot about right now and in 2019 that you rarely get a chance to talk about professionally, socially. Just what are some things that you think a lot about, and one of them that I'd like to touch on that you mentioned to me before is monetary policy, and what you just said, 800 billion. What was the number that you gave?
Yeah. Well, so maybe I should step back. So if you look at it since the financial crisis, but it's really been longer than that, we've progressively moved away from sound money. We started to move away from sound money about 10 years before the Great Depression, when the Fed started to set interest rates. And the rationale was we wanted to reduce the effects of the business cycle. We wanted to smooth out the business cycle. And if the government could manipulate interest rates, you could impact on how much money gets borrowed versus not borrowed. And then that would cause the economy to heat up or slow down, and you could kind of press the brakes and the gas. I think that ended up being the primary cause of the Great Depression, actually, because what it encouraged banks to do was to loan money to not creditworthy buyers. And when that happens,
and why did it do that?
Well, when interest rates are lower, so most things in this world, the price is set by supply and demand, and money should be no different, in my opinion. And so when an interest rate is set, it should be what the bank believes is the valid price for money based on supply and demand for people who want to borrow that money.
So kind of in layman's terms, take out $1 million and we're going to charge you a small fee to take that out versus take out $1 million, we're going to charge you 10%, a large fee. We're going to charge you a very small fee and encourage people to take it out.
Right. So like, let's take this can of Recess that you gave me here. Let's say that the government says, what does this cost per can roughly?
Maybe $3.
$3. Okay.
It's a little bit more expensive.
Let's say that the government says, okay, we're going to set an arbitrary price of $15 for Recess. Okay, now let's say that you're the CEO of Recess. Are you going to make more of it or less of it?
Yeah, less of it.
Well, you make more, right? Because you get paid $15.
If they guarantee, that's right. If there's everyone has to drink Recess.
Well, but here's the so then what happens on the other side is how many people want to pay $15 for Recess? Right. Maybe not so many.
Not so many, but if it's a monopolistic, you have to drink Recess. You have to buy the U.S. dollar. You're not going to buy.
But what happens in practice is you produce a vast surplus of it, right? Because the market, if the market set the price with supply and demand, you'd keep producing until the market doesn't want more, and the price would be the market clearing price between supply of the Recess drink and demand for that Recess
which is probably happening right now for them. They launch, they put in $3, they might learn, actually, we need to charge $2.
Yeah.
Or, wow, actually, there's a lot of demand, we could charge $4, and they kind of get to that point naturally.
Right. And so what most people don't understand is that a price is not just about what you pay for something. A price is a signal. A price is a signal about an input to the economy and what it's worth. And it tells producers whether to make more or stop making more. And it induces consumers to either consume more or stop consuming more. And so the reason that free markets work is that free markets allocate capital and resources dynamically, correctly that way, without there being any central authority to set that. Now, let's say that you say, okay, in a free market, interest rates would be 6%. But, and that is if the market clearing price based on supply demand. But let's say the Fed sets interest rates at 2%. More people are going to borrow money.
Right. It's super cheap. It's artificially cheap.
It's cheap, right? And so what ends up happening is in an economy where you have artificially low interest rates, you create some pretty perverse incentives. You create,
and just to be clear for our listeners, that is how it's priced. It's not.
That is how it's priced.
We have these interest rates that anyone can look up and see what they are, but they are decided by the
Fed.
Room of people.
Yeah, and it's like
2% instead of.
And
6%.
we would say it's crazy for the government to set an arbitrary price for this Recess drink because it would cause an incorrect amount of the drink to be made.
Right.
But what is the most important thing to price in the entire economy? I would argue that it's money. And we do have price controls for our money. And so we've got that, but then we've also got the Fed just printing money like crazy. And so, we have over $20 trillion of debt. So what kind of...
And I think I just learned that we had about $5 trillion US dollars in circulation before the financial crisis. And I think we have over 20 trillion now in circulation, meaning we've increased the amount of US dollars fourfold. Could be wrong by a little bit here. Fourfold in the last basically 10 years.
So I'm not sure about that. I don't have those facts, but if you think about it, let's say interest rates are artificially low, and now you're a Fortune 500 company. You used to have different kinds of choices. You used to, if you have a profit dollar, you could decide to invest in a breakthrough new product. You could decide to invest it in version 2 of your product. You could decide to invest in machines that make things more efficient, take out jobs. You could decide to
purchase
buy back your own stock, dividend the dollars, buy a company, lobby the government for handouts, or sue people, right? Like the music industry does. The problem with artificially low interest rates is that companies conclude it's more in their interest to engage in what I call fake growth. So, like IBM now has borrowed over $100 billion just to buy back its own stock. And when interest rates are artificially low, the penalty or the price of doing that makes complete sense to them.
Because the hurdle you have to clear if you want to pay it back is very low.
Right. And it's
low.
Exactly. You can borrow money at below what a normal market rate would be and use it to buy back your own stock. That's a lot easier way to have your stock go up than to actually build whole new products that create whole new lines of business and kind of growth the old-fashioned way. Mm-hmm. So we see a world now where the Fortune 500 has borrowed, or not borrowed, spent $800 billion last year, 2018, to buy back its own stock. And you look at that, and then you say, let's think about normal people who play by the rules. Let's take our grandparents. Well, they're getting interest rates that are artificially low on what they save. And so while people who are, playing casino capitalism on Wall Street with money that they're just zapping around all over the place, or Fortune 500 companies borrowing money to buy back their own stock, or Fortune 500 companies using their profit dollars, when you buy back their own stock, you're not doing anything for the workers of the company unless they're big stockholders. What you're really doing is you're jacking up the share price, and very often managers get an even accelerated bonus on that because they get rewarded based on the share price.
Right.
And so you get this zero sum mindset of growth.
As and I might be too dumb to follow exactly, but let me try to kind of recast it. So you're saying company X, Fortune 500 company X can just borrow $100 billion, buy their own stock, pump up their own stock price. And most people in company X, because it's not like Silicon Valley or technology where a lot of employees own stock. Most people in company X, let's say it's company X out of Champaign, Illinois, no one really owns the stock except for the 5% of upper management. Yeah. They're all compensated or at least rewarded for stock going up. So they're able to just get $100 billion, buy their own stock, pump up the stock by this massive influx of demand for that limited amount of stock.
Right.
And generate pretty great rewards on their compensation for the stock price going up, but what you're calling fake growth.
Yeah. And then if I'm a hedge fund and I went long that stock, I make money too. And in fact, I can use leverage to borrow money to buy that stock because money's priced below a market rate. And so and
these companies will try to say, like company X will try to say, well, we think our stock's undervalued and we're going to show you that we're going to grow
we
into
believe
this.
in it.
Yeah, we believe in it more than the public. So this is a sign of confidence. But really what they're understanding is just you move that interest rate up. Okay, we don't believe in it that much.
It's like I call it growth theater or fake growth. And so, I mean, this is kind of what happened to GE. GE got way more concerned about manipulating the optics of their share price than creating real growth. And eventually it all unwinds on itself. But in the meantime, what did any of this stuff do for the workers of the company? Mm-hmm. Nothing. They didn't. It doesn't help them build new products. It doesn't help them. Their profit dollars, rather than being spent on buying back stock, would have been if your goal is to create new products that have breakthroughs in the standard of living and employment, you would want Fortune 500 companies to create more products like the iPhone or the Tesla or breakthroughs.
Right.
But all the incentives for upper management in these companies, unfortunately, are around freeing up capital through process improvement that then goes back to buying back your own stock or things like that, rather than breakthrough ideas that are truly disruptive or to put a better word on it, job creating innovations. So like most of the innovations that Fortune 500 companies are doing today are at best sustaining innovations, or maybe even efficiency innovations where they're trying to take labor out of processes.
Or preservation initiatives that are just trying to stomp out competitors that would do it better.
Yeah. And so I believe that the lack of soundness of our money has done way more to create wealth inequality than most people realize. And so I think that the average person who just worked their career and played by the rules and was honest is seeing their money appreciate at a lower rate than they would see it appreciate if interest rates were set by supply and demand. If I'm buying bonds today, they're indexed off the Fed and the Fed's assessment of what interest rates ought to be, rather than the market interest rate set by supply and demand, which would be higher. And so ironically, the people who are winning it's like the government has a big hose that just sprays money out. And the people who are close to the hose are people like on Wall Street, or people like in hedge funds, or people who are borrowing money to buy back stock. And those are the people closest to the hose are getting richer than they should. And the people who are just doing their jobs and trying to do it the old fashioned way are falling farther and farther behind. And the saddest thing about it all is that then the politicians turn around and blame the failure of the quote unquote free market for all this. They say,
or they blame innovators that create something from their garage to $1 billion. And they're saying, they say every billionaire is a policy failure.
And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Right. Like Jeff Bezos can deliver razor blades to me faster than I can get a blood test,
and employs
for a life-threatening condition.
People from something that he started, out of a garage. And people say, well, you shouldn't lobby for tax breaks and stuff like that. But I bet people like Bezos, if everybody played by the rules consistently and there was no upside in lobbying governments, there's no upside in lobbying for tax breaks, he would still win. Right?
He would still win.
Well,
right?
I mean, the market is everything that it takes to build something like Amazon to what it is. It's working through lobbyists or playing the other rules that everybody else. That's much easier. That is super easy.
So I think that the lack of sound money in our society has played a much bigger role in wealth inequality than people see.
So one of the things that it brings to mind is this concept of mugshot targets. Like, you need a face, and that's why someone like Jeff Bezos is potentially the becoming the icon of inequality. Even though in your story it's the people right next to the hose, and not someone that creates 600,000 jobs or whatever Amazon employs. But who are these people? How do you? And the reason it's societally just kind of fascinating that we need these mugshot targets is like, you can't villainize an idea for the American public as it seems. It's like you need faces. Who are these people? Are there faces, or is that the reason that no one's complaining about monetary policy? Because it's like, well, who are those people?
Yeah, well, I guess I think there are a couple things. So I think we're shifting to a new kind of capitalism. So a lot of people, when they think about companies, they think that they're just always the way they are. But really, companies as we know them started really happening in about 1850. So you had the railroad and the steam engine. And the railroad and the steam engine created the context of the modern corporation. Nobody had enough money to build a transcontinental railroad. So J.P. Morgan helped create a market of stock ownership units to own a piece of a railroad. But you could imagine going to some blacksmith in 1850 and asking him, do you want to share in a railroad? Well, you can't buy groceries with it. You can't buy a seat on a train with it. What good is this share of stock? It sounds like a confidence man scheme, right? And so J.P. Morgan had to convince a lot of people to buy stock in a railroad, and we fund the railroad. And then from that, a whole bunch of breakthroughs happened, driven mostly by mass production and mass distribution. And, you look at the year 1870, Cornelius Vanderbilt was the richest man in America. He didn't have flushing toilets. He didn't have the light bulb. He didn't have running water. It didn't have electricity of any kind. Most people, if you ask them today, even poor people, Would you like to have as much money as Cornelius Vanderbilt had? It would say yes, because he had hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, you have to go back to 1870 to have it. Would you trade? Most even poor people would not make that trade today. And that is the best argument I can think of for the abundance created by these breakthroughs in capitalism. But I think what's happened is the corporate capitalism characterized by mass production, mass distribution is now being supplanted by network capitalism. And network capitalism leverages mass computation and mass connectivity. And
is that where does that term network capitalism come from?
I just kind of made it up. I don't know what to call it yet.
Right.
But it's amazing the parallels. So like if you look at corporations in the 1850s through the 1880s, you had William Jennings Bryan and the populist movement. You had Luddites coming in, breaking the machines. You had child labor laws. You had the trust busters later on, like Teddy Roosevelt. And not everything about industrial capitalism was good, right? There was a lot of pushback that was valid, but the standard of living of humanity went up 14-fold in real terms from 1850 to 2000, right? So we've literally had to shift the definition of what it means to be poor, because like rich people didn't have back then what poor people have now. And I'm not saying let's shuffle that under the rug or whatever, but I'm just saying we should recognize facts for what they are. A 14-fold increase in human standard of living in real terms in 150 years is a freaking miracle, right? That's more abundance than has ever been created in all the history combined leading up to it. We've had whole centuries or whole, periods of several hundred years where we couldn't detect a measurable change in GDP per capita. And then all of a sudden it was like a light switch turned on.
And you're saying it's partially due to this increasingly networked capitalism. Now it is. But
yeah. So like I believe that the next thing that will bring abundance forward will be network capitalism. So mass production and mass distribution brought material abundance to the world. And now for the most part, that's very good. The bad part is the toll that it exacts on the environment.
I just had the impulse to want to write all of this down and remembered we're recording it, because this is really okay. Keep going.
So now what's happening is I believe the animating forces of capitalism are mass computation and mass connectivity. And the reason that that's profound is that computation and connectivity have exponentially increasing properties. Right. The more, Metcalfe's law says the value of a network is a function of the square of the number of nodes. And I know that there's more than one network law. There's Sarnoff's law and there's all kinds of different ones. And then processing power, the ability to sequence a genome, the ability to store data increases exponentially. Because that's true, both of those can bring abundance to the entire world. And so the reason it's problematic to vilify guys like Jeff Bezos is that we should be celebrating people like that. Those are the people who have the ideas that are bringing forward abundance. And we need to unite as a society around creating abundance for everybody in the world. And when we allow some of these silent things running in the background that drive us apart to falsely vilify the people who are bringing abundance forward, that's bad. We need to be excited about network capitalism the way we got excited when we built a transcontinental railroad, or when the light bulb came out with Edison. We need to celebrate those people.
And people like Elon Musk we get to exploit this innovation from this individual that you can clearly see in the last few years is pouring every ounce of themselves. He does not. 2018 looked like it was a brutal year for him in every dimension. And we can sit back and kind of eat popcorn and watch while this individual who had made hundreds of millions, could have been on the beach, decided with PayPal, all right, I'm going to do this again and actually much bigger, or getting us to Mars. And in doing so has now pushed, I think, every major car maker to start producing electric vehicles, because putting it online. And yet in that mugshot target, you can just take these like pixel thin versions of the story and say, yeah, but they're billionaires and here's their face. I want what they have. And that's wealth, when really the wealth is the 66-cent razors delivered to your house. The wealth is electricity that allows you to travel 300 miles for $3. Like that is the wealth that we're getting in return.
Right. And it's a shame because and this is one of the things that really disappoints me about some of the leaders we have in the political sphere today on both sides of the aisle is we should be trying to come together for shared purpose. You know, I've said before that, you know, we can destroy each other out of our cynicism, or we can lift each other up out of shared purpose. And right now, all of us can't seem to get out of our own way, right? Us in the tech industry, you know, we use terms like artificial intelligence and robots eating the jobs and automation and, you know, very non-empathetic language to describe things. The narrative about technology has all become about big tech. It's become about 3 or 4 companies and, you know, what the mistakes that they're making. And right now, a lot of these startups that are just doing amazing work, people don't understand the potential that they have to bring things forward. So I find that disappointing. You know, on one hand, the vernacular of pitting group against group and trying to make people afraid and asking who's to blame for something, but then tech industry can't get out of its own way. And you know, if I'm let's say I'm the Austin City Council and the taxi lobby comes to me and says, you know, we've been following the laws for 70 years, and you know, this Uber and Lyft, and they come in and they talk about disruption and all this other stuff, you know, you're going to be pretty sympathetic to that argument. And so we, you know, the tech industry needs to make a way better case for the prosperity that it can bring forward to people, and not just in terms of products, but in terms of jobs and opportunities for everybody, not just techies.
Right. Yeah, I heard the term, and it's not widely used, but I heard or saw a friend write term. Thankfully, it's not widely used. Months ago, of calling normies people that weren't in tech normies, and
really?
And it's just so alienating. This guy's like barely in tech too, but it's so alienating, and it's inviting a rebound. It's inviting a counteraction.
Yeah.
To act like you're better, or act like it's above, act like you're living in the future, act like you know truth that others don't, instead of realizing, one, when you feel like you got these secrets that no one else has, you're going to attract a lot of attention of people prying it out of your hands. But 2, you're going to alienate the people that the best technology is built for everyone. Almost from the beginning, something like Apple Computer just designed in its ethos for everyone to give, you know, the mind a bicycle to make us all more productive. And yeah, you can hear narratives that subtly, but when you just peel it back, you realize, God, that couldn't be further than what some of these narratives were, where it's like fastest company to $1 billion valuation.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with providing, you know, provision for others.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people talk about robots eating the jobs. And if I were going to say, you know, Peter Thiel poses a question, a lot of people believe X is true. What is a not X that you believe that a lot of people don't believe? So I don't believe robots are going to eat the jobs as much as they're going to eat the need for people to join companies. And so I think we've got, say, 5 million gig workers right now, but we have 50 to 70 potential solopreneurs. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea of technology putting an Iron Man suit on all those people and giving them what normally took the infrastructure of a company you had to work for to do a job. And so why can't technology help talented people find customers and have a billing system and, you know, all the stuff that a company has, front office, back office, demand gen, lead funnel, all that stuff. It's almost like Shopify for people. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited about ideas like that, because I think that is way more likely to happen than everybody's out of work. And it's it comes from this same conceit. There's too many people in tech who, because they just don't get out there enough, their worldview is, I'm making a product, and all the rest of these quote unquote normies hate that word as well.
Yes, and please, I hope that does not turn into a thing that people adopt. But it's to really villainize even that alienation. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, it's like and these people get modeled as if they're just passive consumers. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I'm a tech overlord. I build this product that a bunch of passive consumers are going to like, and they should be happy that I'm bringing this kind of abundance to them. Mm-hmm. And like, I just think that very framing of the issue is not only wrong, but it can cause people to not even deliver the right types of products to people. So I'm more interested in startups that say, no, that's not true. People out there aren't passive consumers. People are out there they believe in the American dream. They want to take control of their destiny. Let's give them the tools to force multiply, tens of millions of people at a time, and not need to have a job working for the man, or not need to have a job where they're dependent on somebody else, or dependent on following somebody else's rules.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it's robots don't eat the jobs. Robots eat companies.
The companies.
And that's really interesting.
And that would be my contrarian belief. I believe that robots are more likely to eat the companies, or the need for lots of big companies, than they are to eat the jobs.
Well, and you can see it just in the phones in our pockets. 100 years ago, you could have imagined many of the things that these phones do. You could have imagined this anthropomorphic, robot delivering, but it comes about in a way that's not this two-legged, two-armed robot, but it is technology pushing a company forward and pushing individuals forward. I know that it is. I think there's going to be this bear market, or this bull market, in side hustles, because you can just from your iPad you can start recording a podcast. You obviously in the last few years blog and publish the written word to anyone around the world instantaneously. It is mind-blowing when you zoom out and realize what we've done in the last 20 years for the individual.
Yeah. I love this book. I forget the author's name. It's called The $100 Startup. And it talks about how people can start things way more easily than they realize. Mm-hmm. A lot of startups, if you have 1,000 customers, like, I don't know if you ever heard of this article, 1,000 True Fans, but mm-hmm. I've always liked it. And, if you have 1,000 true fans, you can almost always make more money servicing your fans than working for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And we're heading towards a world where that's going to be more and more probable for people.
Yeah. My wife's an artist. We're actually in her art studio right now. And she's, learning from people that are just making YouTube videos on, acrylic paint or digital art, and gaining following, gaining revenue by being just independent content creator, essentially a teacher. Yeah. That she gets to take those classes for free on YouTube, then put her art up on a site that she has, another individual that's just a freelance developer that helps her build the site. And she's like a perfect example of a networked capitalist that you would have, like, robot. It looks nothing like a capitalist 50 years ago, but she is not only an entrepreneur, but she's networked this entire ecosystem of her supply chain, her business. Yeah. And it is so fascinating. She just starts messaging someone she's never met, she likely will never meet, and emojis left and right because they love working together to build out her site.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about it.
Shout out to Jesse up in Portland, who is a great developer. I've seen some of their condos. He's wicked fast. So tell me about. I want to ask you about this phrase, scissor statements.
Yeah. So this is a little bit related to not destroying each other out of our cynicism. So there's a blog post that I read in the last week. I don't know how current it is, but it's. Have you ever heard of this thing, Slate Star Codex?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know what is it.
So there was an article right before the election that I really liked called "I Can Tolerate Anybody Except for Someone in the Outgroup," and it talked about how, if you think about it, the real definition of tolerance ought to be my ability to tolerate somebody who's in a tribe different from mine. That's in some ways probably the purest definition. And recently,
right? Because if they're in your tribe, that's very easy to.
And so there's a recent post called "Sort by Controversial," and it's really pretty terrifying in some ways. So the story is that this anonymous guy worked at an ad tech firm, and they were trying to create an AI engine that would create ads, statements that would elicit a really strong response. And so they learned that from the AI that they would go on these Reddit boards, and there's already a controversial sort on Reddit. So they could test. Right. They could test with a controversial sort on Reddit,
and that's just how many upvotes, downvotes. So it has 5,000 upvotes and 0 downvotes. Maybe it's a top post, but if you sort by controversial,
exactly
2,500 up, 2,500 down, they just know it might be at 0.
That's right.
That's the most controversial because they negate each other, but it's the most controversial.
So now you train an AI engine about how to create statements that are likely to be highly controversial, and in the story, what happens is the woman who creates the algorithm gives this guy an example. And he's like, well, that's not really controversial because obviously that's just wrong, what it spit out. And she's like, well, what do you mean it's wrong? It's like, I kind of agree with it. And they start arguing about why they disagree. And they get to a point where a couple of hours go by and they're still arguing. And now they're really pissed at each other, because they think, how could you argue this and be so obtuse and be acting in such bad faith and just not honor the truth at all? So they go
or the backdrop of, now I'm seeing this person's in the out group.
Yeah, or it's like this person and who I thought they were, right? And then I thought this was a good guy. He's not a good guy. I thought she was a good person, but I'm not quite so sure anymore. So they go to this other developer, and the second developer agrees with the woman and says, well, clearly she's right. And he's like, what the hell are you two people talking about? Like, is there a hidden camera in here? Do you are you doing this just to mess with me? Like, what's up with this? So they go to the CEO of the company. The CEO of the company agrees with the first guy, and they get into this 3-hour argument, and they get so pissed that he ends up firing the two people, that the woman and the person who agree with him at first. And then only later does it occur to them, holy shit, we were in the middle of the frenzy of this argument, and we didn't have the presence of mind to step back and realize this was a scissor phrase, right? Or I think that's what they call a scissor statement. And so, what would be some examples of scissor statements? I think someone in the high school years was assaulted by Kavanaugh. Or, another one might be, I think Colin Kaepernick was, name your term, right or wrong, to kneel during the national anthem. And there's enough, this article suggested that enough scissor statements had emerged from this trained AI machine.
And who was training it?
It's just this ad tech company.
Okay.
And that enough scissor statements had emerged from this AI machine to cause you to believe that other people have created scissor statements the same way and are injecting those scissor statements into our daily discourse to create tribalistic
They
division.
came across it and they're like, what do we have here? Okay, we have this ability to create conflict or controversy and train and manifest it. And then they realized, okay, other people must have coming up with this as well.
That's right. And because some of the statements it would generate, they'd be like, oh my God,
we've seen this.
We've seen that. This is just like Brett Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court and somebody coming forward.
Right.
And the point isn't whether you can agree with that statement or you can disagree with it. But the point is that people who normally think of themselves as having aligned objectives and beliefs, it taps into something inside them that makes them incapable of accepting the point of view of the other. And it causes them to say that person is thinking in bad faith and whatever.
Incapable, but also it sounds like incapable of also not responding.
That right.
Like they need to have some type of.
That's right.
They can't just walk away
because controversy gets engagement, right? And so if you choose to take the scary interpretation of it, you might think that there are people out there, and you could, regardless who it is, whether it's the Russians, our own government, our own politicians, whoever, like it terrifies me the thought that in the 2020 election, scissor statements may be generated the way social media marketing was used to help Obama get elected. Because Obama is just using social media to get his point out there and to get people energized and excited. But some of these scissor statements are intentionally, cynically manipulative, designed to pit people against each other.
Well, there's psychological studies that have shown when someone feels unsafe, they choose more conservative options.
Yeah.
And so and I can't remember what the study is, but it is a growling dog and choices. I think it's growling dog and choices of that these researchers put before someone. Growling dog 15 feet away, and just how drastically it affected choices from people versus the control of the no dog being there. And the I can't remember if that's the exact specifics, but people feeling less safe become more conservative. So you could, and also, by the way, there's a great podcast with, let me look it up because it was recent with Joe Rogan and his guest was Renee DiResta. She's the director of research at New Knowledge and a Mozilla fellow in Media, Misinformation, and Trust. And she studied this for 3 years, not this, but something similar for 3 years, realizing that what we heard about what the Russians did in the 2016 election of 200,000 fan pages with 200,000 people, it was like, no, it's way worse, that it was tens of millions of dollars spent, hundreds of full-time people creating this content that was splitting us and reaching. Again, I could get the specific numbers wrong, but listen to the podcast because her research claims that they're reaching audience of 75 to 150 million Americans. Basically, the voting American public were all reached through these efforts. I don't know if she called them scissor statements or not, but that's on the Russian side of things. But then, to an even scarier point, you could see our own politicians realizing, well, we can sway one way or the other by creating these.
Yeah, or you could create divisions that bring your core constituency closer to you and bring people farther apart from you, but they were never going to vote for you anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I get really nervous about that. And it reminds me a little bit of this whole silent thing about our money supply and our monetary system not being very sound. Both of these things are kind of silent killers when you think about it, right there, because people are angry at each other about disagreeing about some identity-based topic, or angry about things like wealth inequality, or angry at certain individuals who've been successful, and they don't realize that they're all being played. Like all of us are being played at the same time, and all of us kind of need to. We have this saying at Floodgate. We wrote down our 5 values, and one of them is seek truth over tribalism. And the idea behind that is that whenever an emotionally charged topic comes up, the natural place to go is your tribe. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but as an investor, facts have a way of being stubborn. Companies win or they lose, or they succeed or fail, and it kind of doesn't matter how we feel about it. It's like the facts will assert themselves. Right.
Or kind of a commitment to truth over a commitment to consistency. Because it's so easy just to go back to what you've said over and over again. And same with investing. Just go to what earned you that return 5 years ago, rather than realizing, well, what earned that return was contrarian thing.
So like, how do you take ego out of decision making? And how do you sort of come up with mechanisms that create a culture where you honor the truth over who got their way in the discussion?
Well, what is really, as I'm thinking about it on this is really fascinating, scissor statements. And the article is called Sort By.
Yeah, it was called Sort by Controversial in Slate Star Codex.
Well,
and when you read it, you'd be like, oh my God, this is like 10 times more terrifying than what Maples is saying here.
Well, what is interesting about it is you could say monetary policy, or you could drop these terms like monetary policy or manufactured controversy. Those aren't scissor statements.
Right.
You're not going to have people be like, what are you talking about? Interest rates.
Yeah.
Maples, what do you, but you drop in, I think we need more Bezoses, and you're going to have people that come to the conversation saying, we don't want more billionaires. That's what's wrong with us. That could be I don't know if that's a great scissor statement. 'Cause I don't know if there's that much animosity.
But I do think the animosity towards the people who've been successful, some of these people who talk about wealth inequality, it's a little bit of a scam. Like, should you care more about wealth inequality, or should you care about having there be no poor people?
Right.
Like, I care way more about having there be no more poor people, right? And what do people like Bernie Sanders really want? And this is where I might get myself in trouble. What he really wants is some of Jeff Bezos's money, so he can do whatever programs he wants to do. And but to me, the objective function ought to be, how do we help the poor people come out of poverty? And taking money from Jeff Bezos is not the way to do that, right? Like, there's a whole lot of other things that cause people to be poor, contribute to people being poor, that have nothing to do with soaking it to Bezos.
Well, and to the networked capitalism point, there's a great website. I love this site, Our World in Data. It's started by another development economist, and Max Rosser, a great Twitter account to follow as well. And I love that website because it's just so data driven, and so you can look this fact up there if you like. But inequality is dropped around the world. You ask the average person, is inequality rising or dropping around the world? They'll all say, 9 out of 10 will say it's rising. But no, inequality especially over the last 30 years has dropped precipitously around the world.
Yeah, and poverty has really dropped.
It is hundreds of millions of people being lifted out of abject poverty every decade, based on this globalized networked capitalism. And it certainly has its flaws, but just every statistical point, every single one globally, from education to prosperity to abject poverty, they're very positive trends. And we have some really messed up trends as well, like domestically inequality is rising, and that is not a recipe for harmonious society. But there are things that if you just go by the headlines, and these, it sounds like scissor statements, you get just charged, and you're not actually able to follow the truth that maybe certain parts of capitalism are creating, or the system that Bernie Sanders wants to rearrange, are creating inequality in the U.S. But many of those same factors have created great equality over the last 30 years in a pretty
and I guess I would assert that if you really want to attack wealth inequality, you would start by reasserting the primacy of sound money. Like, if you really wanted to solve it, and honestly, for real, and not just give speeches and say these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, you would have a rational, sound money policy that would cause people to have an incentive to invest money in things that produce things, rather than shuffling money around, skimming off the top.
I don't know, Maples. You can't. We need bad guys. We need people. Need this mugshot target. You can't villainize an idea. Yeah, you got to have. I think I'm incredibly intrigued by what you're saying, but I just, in those scissor statements, or in just the people that I know, it's people really want just one fall person, just to be, that's the person that's causing this, or that's who has what I want and I want to take it from them. And you mentioned monetary policy, and people's eyes they'll glaze over. Yeah. No, but I think you give something enough volume as well, and people wake up to it too.
But it's interesting too. I think that for all of us, I do think there's a lot of value in knowing that these scissor statements are out there. Right. And it's, even if all it does is cause us to hesitate a half step and say, hey, wait a second here. Like, I think that headline, like right there, I think that's been planted by somebody to divide us.
Right.
And I'm not going to be so quick to let my lizard brain activate my anger at the other. Right. Like, maybe I'm getting played here. And maybe that would be just exactly what they want me to do in this situation. Like, if anybody listening to this says, holy crap, that's a good point, I'm going to slow down a half step. That would be good. That would cause us to have fewer things like this Covington kids nonsense, or the Jesse Smollett thing, or the, all these things where people immediately take sides and start, engaging in divisive rhetoric before they really know what's happened.
Well, and it's just so scary how that once it's in the water can permeate all these different layers, to where then the newspapers know these are the topics that seem to be driving most of our traffic, or that spike in traffic in November. Well, it was these 2 articles. Let's write more on this topic. Yep. And then you have journalists that are exclusively looking for feeding those beasts. And then you have our public discourse dominated by these things that were, it sounds like, potentially injected or manufactured from the water cooler, then into the water, then into the dialogue. And now for some reason, these are the topics that were.
Yep. But it's like a fire that spreads really fast on social media. Our gullibility is the oxygen that lets it spread. Right. Like if we take our gullibility away, we deprive the scissor statement people of their power.
Right.
To divide us. Right.
You have to listen to this Renee DiResta, because it is, her research puts like hundreds of full-time people in Russia working on, like, puts maybe not a mugshot or a face, but at least give some specifics to what you're talking about. Well, like, I feel like we've been almost 2 hours, and
okay. Sorry about that.
No, are you kidding? I've loved every minute. I can't wait to have you back. But there's a handful of things I had here that we didn't get to, but that's how we'll hook listeners for part 2 of our conversation, from scissor statements to learning a lot about monetary policy, to network capitalism, to learn about you, your parents, your background, and learning about just some of the things, small things that made big differences in your career, like going up and chatting with people like John Doerr, Bill Campbell. Thank you for sharing your time with all of us.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. It's fun.
This was a blast. Thanks so much. Can't wait for part 2. Friends and listeners, thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, or you enjoy Below the Line in general, go ahead and subscribe on the iTunes podcast app, or leave a quick review. We love those, basically because we love hearing from people that find value from these kinds of conversations. And leaving a review, good or bad, is a great way to encourage more of this dialogue, and lets us know that people are enjoying it. So we appreciate those. You can also follow us on Twitter at Below the Line Podcast, and tweet us questions anytime. Or you can email us at askbelowtheline@gmail.com. That's Below the Line Podcast on Twitter, and askbelowtheline@gmail. I had no idea why those are different, but anyhow, I'm your host, James Beshara, and this has been another episode of Below the Line. Until next time.
Below the Line with James Beshara is brought to you by Straight Up Podcasts.